Well, hello. I built another mountain banjo recently, and if you want to see how to build a standard five-string mountain banjo, there's another video I had done on that um, that uses goat skin and does it in the very old school fashion, and it's a well liked video, and I think you could enjoy that. But I had this idea. For building a six-string mountain banjo, and it kind of started because I had this skin, which is what do they call those, banjolele skin. So it's a ukulele banjo, and it's a cheap plastic head. I don't think much of it, but I had it. Not, I bet I could build the banjo around an 8-inch banjo head. And so I did, and this is the finished product. I'm going to play that and kind of give you a feel for what it sounds like. And then after that, then I'll kind of reverse engineer it. I'll be taking it apart and showing the different pieces and what I did. So it's essentially 3 slabs of wood, just like the other mountain banjo. And you squeeze your, your tone ring, which is here, which I made out of plywood, and you squeeze that against the skin to make tension. On this particular one, I put this ring of oak here that holds the skin in place so that I can tighten the screws up against the back. And you can see, yes, I put some electronic paddles here. So it is electronic, and I'll be playing with that a little bit too. It's 6 strings. There's the headstock, got a oak fretboard, maple neck, so on and so forth. This strap, I'll show that. It's made by my oldest daughter, Ashley. She does all kinds of leather work. She also has a bunch of other things she does: mugs, coffee cups, purses, spur straps. You can look that up. It's Pistol Ashley, a very talented gal, and that's the strap. So it sounds like this. So I like that sound. I actually am going to change heads on it, which will be part of the video later on as we go back through it and see how this thing's put together. I've got a Remo microfiber head, that looks kind of more like a simulated goat skin head, and I wanted a synthetic head. I could put a goat skin head in here, the leather, but those are more sensitive to temperature changes and so on and so forth. And as this is more of a kick around banjo, it's something I thought I could haul around, go camping with, whatever I want. I kind of wanted a synthetic head so it wasn't as sensitive to climate change. So that's what I came up with. And some people say, well, that's a banjo, that's a banjo guitar, whatever people call them. But according to Deering Banjo, that had a very good article about it, it's not. They're called 6-string banjos. People play them different ways. Sometimes, yes, people do tune them like a guitar. Other times they're tuned to an open banjo tuning, which is a lot like playing slack key guitar, which I've done my share of. That was a big thing back in the late 19th century. A company in England was making some 6-string banjos, etc. And then I went and put electronics in a mountain banjo, which is weird. I know, and you've always got the banjo police out there, that there's an old joke, how many banjo players does it take to change the light bulb, 11, 1 to change the bulb, 5 to say complain about it being electric, and another 5 to say that's not how Earl would have done it. Now, what I would say about all of that, first of all, is we owe a great debt to Earl Scruggs and all that he did for furthering five-string banjo. But he didn't do it by being a stick in the mud that said it has to be done this traditional way all the time and you can't branch out. He did it by being extremely innovative and not doing it the way everyone else is doing it. So you have to admire that. As far as electronics go, it's handy, and so that's why I did it. I'm sure there's some banjo purists out there that just think it's the most horrible thing in the world that you could do that. Whatever. I just thought it'd be fun. So here it is. We'll get it all set up. Acoustic sounding. And I'm working on that. So that's, of course, that's acoustic sounding with some reverb and chorus and delay. And I'm just playing around to show you it can do things. But in the process, it has what's it called, a setting on here, crunch. And so we're going to turn the volume down because it really overdrives. And we'll experiment with that just for fun. So we'll unplug it now so everyone feels better. But you know, it's fun to be able to do that. The idea about the paddles is, you know, actually mountain banjos aren't that loud, and you may be playing somewhere and need to plug it in and get that acoustic sound, and it does actually reproduce the banjo sound pretty well. These are nylon strings. These are Hanna-Box super high tension flamenco strings. Excellent strings. I use them on some of my nylon string guitars as well. And so we're starting this video with the finished product, which is a little different than usual. But I thought, you know, rather than drag people who aren't interested through the whole build process, we'll start with the finished product, and then we'll go back and look at how it was put together. And in case you want to do this. And now what I tell you, of course, I hand carve my neck and do all of that, but people can do that, and I'm not the only one. So if you ever thought, hey, I'd like to try something like that, as we go through this, you'll be able to see how it's done and what that looks like. So I hope you enjoy the rest of this video as I talk about the build process. We'll see you in just a little bit. Well, hello. So I have my new Remo head that I'm going to put in, and you see it's fiber skin. So it is synthetic, you can see by the shiny inside, but it's made to look like animal hide. And it's less sensitive to weather and temperature change. It sounds a little different than a typical plastic head. It gives it more of a warm tone, usually similar to a animal skin. It's not identical. You can't synthesize the sound of goat skin, but it does a pretty good job. For the purposes I have, it will do just fine. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna switch these out. And I think, one, I do think it's going to look a lot better, and I don't think you're going to be able to see these electronic paddles through it. It won't be that translucent, and so on. So all I'm going to do now is detune the strings a little bit so there's not much tension on there. Slide the bridge out, and then I'm gonna loosen these screws and take the back off. When I get that far, that's a great time to talk about the construction of this instrument, how it's made. There's no point in you watching me loosen the screws. That's just boring. And I am going to use a cordless to take the screws out. I never use a cordless to put the screws in. I have no problem zipping them out of there, but on a musical instrument like this, I really don't want to take those chances of over tightening or anything like that. It's not that much labor to just do it by hand and put the back on, especially when you're putting it in order, when you're tightening it up and getting tension on that head. You want to do everything crisscross as you tighten it, and we'll look at all that as I go. And you want to do it by hand so you don't overdo it, and you want to get your tension. Usually I shoot for about, I use a drum dial a lot of times when I'm setting up a banjo head. I usually try to get them at about 90. This one ended up being about 85 to 86 foot-pounds. And so I think and part of that is I had made shims and stuck a shim in there to make it tighter. I have a shim that I made out of paper, so you can see this, and I had this thick heavy paper. It's made at the paper mill here in town, and we had some ends, and it's almost cardboard, but it's thinner, and then I just shellac it to make it a little harder. Makes a really good shim, and I stick it in behind the tone ring, which I'll show. I stuck one in there to tighten it a little bit. I may put this other one in. It kind of depends on how this head. So here we are. I've got the back loose, and we're going to talk about that. This is the bridge I made specifically for this instrument. So I made a narrow bridge with a little wider bass to help diffuse the sound a little bit, because it helps with the nylon string, and there's a lot of strings. There's 6. And the other aspect of this is you can't just order a 6-string banjo bridge when you make one. When you make the string spacing the same as a classical guitar, it's much too wide. You can see that's a pretty wide bridge, and so I made one. I carved it out of a piece of walnut, drilled some holes in it, carved it down to give it a little shape, and then I cut through the holes and put a oak diffuser on it. So that's how that works. Works great. Pretty happy with it. Before I pop the back, you can see here, there's no tailpiece on this instrument because this first plate is maple. It's good hard wood. So I just drilled 6 holes at an angle through it, and I tie my strings right on to the base. So if we flip it over, we have our back, and which fits right in here like that and screws down. And so you can see how it's loose now that I pulled the screws. You get a little space, and as you screw it, you get your tension. So there's the paper spacer I made. You can see that on the back, and it's just like the other one here. So we'll put them both together, and that opens this up to the tone ring. Now the tone ring is kind of a 2-piece thing. It's not really, but this is another wooden spacer that fits a little differently. You can see how that fits. I made a notch there for the electronics, and it just pops in there. And that allows this tone ring to come out. And of course, I locked it in by attaching these electronic paddles, which have to come off anyhow because we're going to put them on a different skin. So they just stick on. You can use the 3M stuff. I had these clear double stick circles. I have enough of them. I'll use them again. I'll use some different ones. the same product on the next skin. And then this ring comes out like that. And this was just made, you can see I just laminated some plywood together. Then I routed it off so it'd be a little round. And that's the tone ring. This happens to be a real lightweight one, which is fine. And then your skin is right there. And it just pops right out. And there we have it. And we still have our strings attached. That's kind of a neat thing about the mountain banjo. I didn't really detune it, to be honest with you. It still got a good bit of tension there. I just slid the bridge down past the skin here, flipped it over and popped it out. And the strings are just as they were. And I'll put it back in the same way. That's kind of a neat feature that I can leave all the strings on and change skins like that. And so here we are. If we look at them in comparison, you can see this is a much higher crown. So I'm gonna end up pausing the video while I work on some spacers. But I did measure this when this was stretched, and so I'll kind of create some spacers. But this new one will go in the same way, and it'll look about like that. So there we have it. And that's what we're working on. And then as I do, you will probably, it's still translucent enough, we'll probably still see the electronics, but not as bad. And it's certainly a nicer looking skin. And then once I get that in, of course I have to get all the spacers in place. Then the tone ring will go in, and it has to go under the electronics and drop in place like that. And the spacer, and it all goes back in, and you screw it together. And as you tighten the screws, it will push this tone ring against the skin, and that makes the skin tight. And like I said, I don't like to go over 90 really as a general rule when I'm using a drum dial. But you want to get it up near there if you can, because you get a lot better tone and brighter sound and a little better volume, and it picks up all the different notes better. So you can see how I did this with an M-pin jack, wired a couple of piezo paddles on there, and stick them right to the skin behind the bridge, and it works just fine for amplifying the sound. And in fact, I'm peeling off one of these round deals. You can see it's just a clear round double stick. I'm going to toss that obviously and put fresh ones on so they stay, because when things start vibrating they won't. And so on and so forth. So that's what we're working on, and we'll just be putting them back together when we get a chance. So here's the finished product. I'm pretty happy with the looks. Particularly, it looks much more natural having that skin in there, and I like the sound as well. Gives it a more warm, natural tone, a less of a tinny sound. Gives a good mountain banjo feel. So without picks, it's like this. And then if I grab my picks, comparison. Well, I did one more thing to this mountain banjo that I want to talk about. I put a back on it, a resonator, but it's actually doesn't, doesn't stick out from the sides and doesn't have a lip. It's just a flat panel with some spacers that you can see in there. Now the spacers were just eyelets that were on a particular type of zip tie I had. I just cut 4 of those eyelets off. used them as spacers because the screws could go through and lift the back off. And I'm not really going for, by putting a resonator on here, I wasn't going for more volume per se. I was looking for more resonance, and so I thought I'd experiment with that, and it's pretty low-key and simple. I actually had, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I had a 10-inch circle cut out of a 1/4-inch piece of maple plywood that was just really a nice little piece. And so I thought, well, okay, I sanded it and put it on there. I made a 5-string banjo that I put a back similar to this on, and I really liked what it did for the tone on that particular instrument. It was for someone else, it wasn't for me, but I thought I'd try it and see how it goes. So, you know. So what that did, like I said, I'm not sure it increased the volume. Gave it a little different, a little more resonance, and I noticed the lower strings have a little more clarity to them. So I kind of like that, and I like the look of it on there. So I think I'm done playing with it. And you say, why didn't you try to make it louder? Because if you recall from the beginning of the video, it's got electronics. I can plug it in, and frankly, all the changes I've made to it by putting a different skin on, whether it's adding spacers, putting the skin on, or putting this back on, hasn't really affected the electronics because they're just piezo paddles on there that transfer the tone from the skin, and then your amplifier does all the work there. So there's no point in showing that part over and over again, and that's what we have. So I hope you enjoyed this process, and I was going to talk a little bit about banjo history, but I've actually put that in a different video that'll be coming up later. I'm going to talk about banjo history, kind of from 3100 BC in the Mesopotamian plain all the way up to today, and and try to consolidate it all into a decent short enough video that it wouldn't be unbearable to watch, and get to it, how we received it in the U.S., where it went, how it grew, how it developed very quickly without just laboring us down with a lot of dates and stuff, to just tell the story, and from all the different research I've done over the years on it. So that'll be coming up. But what got me thinking about that particularly was the mountain banjo is a particularly unique banjo in that it's the first it was a banjo that wasn't a spike lute, and that comes up in the banjo history, that the banjos fall into a category of instruments known as a spike lute family because they have a rod going through the body, which would have been a spike. It goes through the lute. Usually it comes out the other end, and modern banjos have a bolt or a skin or something. Like some of my other banjos have a double rod system, and so one of the rods actually comes through, and you attach it with a bolt, so it's still a spike lute. But the mountain banjo is different, and when it was developed in Appalachia, it was developed where your strength is all in this rim of wood, this circle of wood, that squeezes the skin in, and you don't have a rod going through the middle. So that's unique, that it's a banjo that's not a spike lute. So I'll talk about that in the other video. Hope you've enjoyed the build process, and you may think, well, wow, you did a lot of weird things to a mountain banjo, and someone out there probably will say it's not even a mountain banjo anymore. You know, banjo is all about innovation. It's an instrument that has been innovated for thousands of years. And if you go all the way back to the Mesopotamian lute, which I'll be talking about in the other video, and the mountain banjo itself was a tremendous innovation on an approach to building banjos, particularly for people who couldn't afford to go buy them. And it was a reinvention of the wheel. And what I've done is innovated this particular. It's a mountain banjo. It's built just like one. It's the same basic build of the original mountain banjo I built that I've emailed out diagrams to people all over the place for that. And it's the same basic package. It's got a slightly different string configuration. It's using a synthetic head instead of goat skin like I would normally do on a mountain banjo. It's got electronics in it. That's different. It's an innovation. And it's got a back on it, which is another innovation. But there's nothing wrong with that. That's how we improve on things. Lord bless you. I hope you enjoyed this video.